Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going into a pretty fascinating area.
Yeah, definitely unsettling too.
Right. The American military's use of psychological operations, Psyops, specifically during the Vietnam War.
We've got an article here that digs into how these tactics, how they evolved and what they were trying to achieve.
Exactly. So our mission for you, listening in, is to really get a handle on how the U.S. military tried to influence, the hearts and minds, perceptions, behaviors of both Vietnamese combatants and civilians.
And the strategies behind it all, plus maybe some of the ethical questions that pop up.
Let's start at the beginning. The article mentions the early stuff was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, initially it was kind of what you might expect. Leaflets drop from the sky, loudspeaker broadcasts over the battlefield. Basic messaging, really.
Okay, but then things got weirder. Let's talk about Operation Wandering Soul. Ghost tape number 10.
Ah, yes. That one's notorious.
It involved broadcasting these really creepy, distorted sounds, like ghostly wails. What was the thinking there? I mean, ghosts.
Well, it was all about exploiting local beliefs. Deeply ingrained ones.
Okay.
There's a strong traditional belief in Vietnam about the spirits of the dead, especially those not properly buried. They're believed to wander restlessly.
So the sounds were meant to sound like those wandering souls.
Precisely. The goal was to create fear, unease, make Viet Cong soldiers think the spirits of their unburied comrades were out there, suffering. It was psychological pressure, tapping into a primal fear.
Wow. And they really went for realism, didn't they? The article says recordings were done in Saigon.
Yeah, Ho Chi Minh City now, of course.
Yeah.
And they used actors.
Actors?
Uh-huh. Actors who could mimic different regional dialects to make the messages hit closer to home, literally.
That's quite something. What were these ghosts actually saying amidst the wails?
It was a mix. You had these mournful cries, battle sounds layered in perhaps, but also direct messages. Things like urging soldiers to desert, to come home so they could have a proper burial, find peace.
Playing directly on that fear of dying far from home and not being properly cared for in the afterlife.
Exactly. Undermining morale by hitting them on a very personal, cultural level.
So these tactics, starting with loudspeakers and this ghost tape, how did they evolve as the war dragged on? Did they get more sophisticated?
They definitely broadened out and became more integrated into military strategy overall. It wasn't just standalone stuff.
How so?
Well, for one, they figured out better delivery systems. The article mentions using artillery shells.
Wait, artillery? Like firing his shells?
Yeah, but instead of explosives, packed with leaflets. It was a way to get messages deep behind enemy lines, places loudspeakers couldn't reach, and planes might be too risky.
Weaponizing information delivery. Literally.
Kind of, yeah. Adapting existing military hardware for Psyops purposes.
And were these efforts focused only on soldiers, or did they target civilians too? You mentioned the strategic hamlets earlier.
Right, the strategic hamlets. That was a big effort to essentially relocate rural populations into controlled villages. The idea was to cut them off from Viet Cong influence.
And Psyops played a role there.
Oh, definitely. They used messaging to encourage people to move, promising safety, better living conditions, that sort of thing, trying to win cooperation, or at least compliance. Persuasion under pressure.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. There were some even stranger operations mentioned, like the Swans. What on earth was that?
The Swans. This wasn't about broadcasts, but about spreading rumors. Fabricated stories designed to demoralize.
Okay, like what kind of story?
The main one was about a mythical bird, the swan, which supposedly drank the blood of wounded Viet Cong soldiers left on the battlefield.
Seriously, a blood-drinking bird.
Yeah, and the story included a warning. Anyone who killed one of these swans would suffer terrible consequences. Bad luck, disaster, that sort of thing.
So the goal wasn't necessarily to make them believe in a literal vampire swan, but more to create unease.
Exactly. Tap into superstition, maybe make them hesitate about how they treated fallen comrades, even enemy ones. Plant a seed of doubt or fear about retribution, about messing with fate or bad omens.
It's a subtle approach, influencing behavior through suggestion rather than, say, direct threats.
Very much so. Psychological manipulation rather than overt force.
This theme of tapping into local culture and beliefs seems really central. The article also brings up the Lady of the Coconut Monk. Who was that?
Okay, so the Coconut Monk, sometimes called the Lady of the Coconut Monk, bit confusing. He was a real person. A rather eccentric but quite popular religious figure in South Vietnam.
And he advocated for peace?
Yes, peace and reconciliation. So the American Psyops teams saw an opportunity. They tried to co-opt his image.
Oh.
By putting his picture on leaflets,
Yeah.
using his message in broadcasts, trying to portray him as being aligned with the South Vietnamese government and American goals. The idea was to use his peaceful image to encourage Viet Cong defections.
Clever. Did it work? Was it effective?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The article points out it's really debatable. There were some reports, apparently from captured Viet Cong, who said they were influenced by these messages. But measuring the actual impact, very, very difficult.
Because people might say what they think the captors want to hear, or maybe it just reinforced existing doubts.
All of the above. Cultural symbols are powerful, yeah. But how they land in a war zone, how individuals interpret them, it's incredibly complex. You can't really predict it.
It's just fascinating to see these very specific, culturally tailored attempts, and it makes you think, how have these ideas carried forward? The article touches on Iraq, Afghanistan.
Yeah, the core principles haven't gone away. Influence, perception management, that's enduring. You see echoes. Like in Afghanistan in 2005, leaflets were dropped urging Taliban fighters to go home.
Similar themes to Vietnam then. Family, peace.
Very similar. Return to your families, lay down your arms. But of course, the methods have changed dramatically.
Because of technology, the internet, social media.
Absolutely. That's the huge shift. The article mentions a 2022 Stanford report.
Yeah, about pro-Russian campaigns.
Right. Analyzing online influence operations, targeting the West, Ukraine, all over. It shows how these Psyops concepts have moved into the digital realm. State actors using social media, fake accounts, disinformation. It's the modern battlefield of perception.
So we've journeyed from, spooky tapes in the jungle.
To sophisticated global internet campaigns.
It really underscores how the fundamental goal manipulating minds in conflict persists, even as the tools become incredibly advanced.
And understanding Vietnam gives us context for today's information warfare, doesn't it? The platforms change, the scale changes, but the attempt to shape belief is constant.
Right. So pulling it all together from our deep dive today, we've seen the U.S. military in Vietnam use this whole spectrum of psyops.
From the really unsettling stuff like Operation Wandering Soul playing on superstition.
To using cultural figures like the coconut monk, trying to encourage defections, tactics with effectiveness that's, still debated.
And it all serves as kind of early chapter for the complex information environment we live in now.
It really does. Understanding this history helps us see the roots of modern influence operations.
Definitely gives you perspective on the human element, the psychological side of conflict, which is always there.
Which brings us to a final thought for you. Thinking about this history, from ghost tapes to Twitter bots, and knowing how sophisticated these operations have become, how do you navigate the flood of information today?
Yeah, how do you tell the difference between genuine information and something deliberately designed to influence you?
And maybe what's our responsibility as individuals and, as a society to actually understand these tactics, to recognize the potential impact on what we believe and how we act? Something to think about.